You know, there was a lot of us that went on a trip just a couple of months ago, and it's really incredible. And even in the midst of challenges, and I know news stories, and some people are so confused about what happens, there is still a connection that can be made, and there's still a hope for peace and a democratic and pluralistic and Jewish state. And I think those are all the things that we want to strive for and be a part of as partners. And we've been sharing those conversations for a while now. And as I move into the Torah portion and share a couple of words about, the Parsha for this particular Shabbat, I begin with another story about Israel, because I remember very clearly it was challenging in the early 90s. You have so many people from the Soviet Union, still a Soviet Union at that time, leaving and moving to Israel in massive numbers. And at some point, there was a joke that started to make the rounds when all of these folks from the former Soviet Union started to land in Israel. And one of them says, what was life like back in Russia? One Israeli says to a new Oleh, a new immigrant within the state. And this Russian Jew who leaves the Soviet Union, he says, I couldn't complain. And the Sabra, the Israeli, is asking, and where were your living quarters like? How was your home? What was it like? And then the Russian immigrant says, I couldn't really complain. What was your standard of living there? I couldn't really complain. So the Israeli is starting to get a little frustrated in this interaction. And he says, if everything was so good back in Russia, what are you doing here? Why'd you bother coming to Israel? And this new Oleh says, here I can complain. It's a very Jewish joke, that's first. But if you go beyond that sense of people coming into freedom and being able to complain, there's some truth to it, that there's sometimes people are not allowed to complain. So the rabbi that told me the joke thinks that where we are in the Torah, the book of Numbers, and the Torah portion for Abalotecha, this is the book of complaints. This is the sacred book of kvetching. The Israelites, at long last, leave Sinai, and they begin this amazing, incredible journey toward the land of Israel, the promised land. But almost as soon as they start off, the book of Numbers tells us that the people took to complaining bitterly. That's what it says in English. They wouldn't stop. Kvetch, 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 and everything they had something to say. And when Moses expresses this frustration to God and is pleading with God, and he says, I alone cannot carry this entire nation. If this is how you're going to deal with me, then kill me now. That's what Moses says. There's a Canadian colleague of mine who compares this to, Daddy, are we there yet? That kind of ongoing message in the car where we're saying, oh my God, it's enough. Why are you complaining? There's nothing to complain about. Things are good. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? The sages are looking carefully at this text. They're looking at the Hebrew in particular, and if you kind of parse the letters, it doesn't really say that people complained. Like we like to joke about it, but that's not really what the text says. It doesn't say that the people complained. It actually says that the people were like complainers. What's the difference? Are they complaining or are they like complainers? Well, there is a difference. There are some folks that aren't actually complaining out loud. They're just murmuring under their breath. That's why God becomes angry. All the people were grumbling, but they never bothered to tell anybody what the problem was. They never articulated what was their concern, what's hurting them, what's bothering them, what are they scared of. They were just, like the parking lot conversation, especially after services. This is what God was upset about. There's an Israeli modern Orthodox rabbi who's a philosopher. His name was Rabbi Pinchas Peli. And he wrote a lot about this idea. And he points out that God does not get angry at people who complain for a good reason. If the complaints are justified, if they're warranted, then people should speak up to make their concerns heard. When the Israelites were hungry, they complained, and God provided manna. We don't really know what manna is. It doesn't exist today. Imagine something like tofu. It's not meat. It's not a vegetable. It's falling from the sky. But it sustains them. right? It gives them sustenance. So they complain, God listens, it's fair, God sends the manna. They were complaining about not having fresh water, and so God helps to make the water in this river sweet. But by now the Israelites have moved into the wilderness. Where we are in the Torah portion, they've been out of Egypt for a while. They have organized themselves, and they have seen all of these amazing things that God has done for them. Therefore, they're complaining without a good reason. They have everything that they need, yet they continue not to complain, but to grumble. And this unwarranted complaining, murmuring, grumbling, it made God a little angry. And it brought Moses, a leader, someone who's trying to take care of everybody, at the end of his wits, just feeling a sense of despair. So I'm going to tell you something. I believe in complaining. Not to me, talk to Holly. There's value in it. It's actually important because we don't know what's hurting each other unless you share it with us. And that's about anything. It's about what's happening in my house. It's what's happening in our synagogue. It's what's happening in our world. It's what's happening in Israel. It doesn't really matter. We have to raise a voice. And we have people in our tradition that have done that all along. It's Abraham and Sarah, certainly Moses. It's my grandma Dottie. It's Hannah also in the Bible. We have people that are raising their voices, women and men alike, in order to try and make something better. Dissent, I think, is important. It's Jewish, but it has to be respectful. The whole Mishnah is about arguing with one another, figuring out what kind of an argument is going to be the one that becomes the law of the land. The rabbis are in disagreement. God is sometimes in the Talmud in disagreement with the rabbis, but the arguments are respectful. The arguments are trying to find the truth, not just to win, but to find the truth. I often share with folks in our community that I think the greatest sin that we face this day is the sin of complacency, the sin of sitting back and doing nothing and waiting for somebody else to do it. I've never met somebody named somebody else. We all kind of wait for somebody else to kind of fill in. I've never met that person. But this idea of being complacent, of sitting back, of not raising our voices, well, there's a consequence to that. If we are complacent, if we don't complain enough, those who don't share the critique to improve our reality, they're not really complainers. They're barely kvetchers. They just mumble and murmur and grumble. And that doesn't contribute to something bigger or greater. These Israelites in Baalotcha, this Torah portion, it says that they're kamitonenim, they're murmurers, complaining for no reason other than the desire to complain. Now, as these murmurings are growing, and they went unaddressed, in two different places in the book of Exodus, we are told that the people in the entire community complained to Moses, as well as to Moses and Aaron together. In this Torah portion, we're told that the riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving. That's what it says, the riffraff. And the Hebrew word for this riffraff, it's asafsuf, which I love. It's a great word. And it sounds a little bit like riffraff. You know, the grumbling again. And, it has that sound to it. There's an echo of talking without saying anything. That's the murmuring of complainers. And this small group, these murmurers, groaners, whatever they are, they had nothing to do better than to spread this negativity. So 6 short verses later, matters are kind of out of control in the Torah. Moses heard the people weeping, every clan apart, each person at the entrance of his tent. I think that we can say from this text that in any community and in any family system, when we don't communicate and we just kind of murmur, we miss the point and we miss each other. We're not present, we don't get to grow, and there's just a resentment that builds. It doesn't have to be in a country. It can just be in our own homes. So, friends, raising our voices matters. Doing so with respect and kavod for another matters. Sharing what's in your heart gently so that somebody else can hear it matters. The murmuring can become toxic. It does for the Israelites, and it does for us. It is for synagogues and other houses of worship, and it certainly is for a whole country. So I think this is a message tonight about taking responsibility for the betterment of our community, whether it's for our country, or it's for Israel, or it's for our synagogue, or it's about your rabbi or your cantorial soloist, whatever it is. I think these are important things to lift up and share so that we can respond and be present and try and make a better connection. But it has to be in a voice that's in the spirit of L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven. It's not just to launch an attack. It's in order to make a better peace, a stronger peace. I think that's what God's hope is for us, that we can communicate and create a place worthy to be called a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering, a house of community, a synagogue. But truly, that kind of a house in this building or in any other, it has to be a safe place for Moses, for the leaders, and for the partners. So let's think about those who like to fetch and those who like to heal. Okay.